Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at 1997 Fleer Goudey football sets. And Fleer Goudey it's both kind of makes sense and kind of weird that they made only football card sets for Goudey in 1997 because they did make insert sets in both baseball and in basketball. But Goudey itself was not a football set, it was a baseball set originally, and yet baseball is not where they made the Goudey set in 1997, only inserts. So, kind of interesting. But I do want to go into a bit of the history of how we got to the Goudey set in the first place because the place that it has is kind of an interesting one. So, in the 1980s, that's really where retro cards and reprints of old cards started to come to a fore. It was a tradition that baseball fans knew in top sets every single year with the turning back the clock cards. And baseball fans really did like that, especially as the decade evolved and card shows became a lot more popular and kids were starting to see more of these old cards. More of a fascination was setting in, and Topps was really catering to that with card designs that were partially designed to touch upon the history of their cards. Because there were three brands. There was Fleer, Donruss, and Topps. And Topps' place in the card market for baseball was they were the old card brand. They were the classic, the legendary. They'd always made the cards. That was their thing. So they always leaned on that through the 1980s. And by 1989, they decided to push that even further by making the Bowman brand for their first additional brand. And they took the old Bowman name that they'd had in the past. They made cards that were a retro design and even a retro size. So the size was a little bit different. And we as card collectors really were fascinated by this. We were pretty comfortable with the 89 set, but we didn't follow along with the whole concept with 1990 and 91 with Bowman. It didn't really have much of a place in the hearts of collectors. So it just kind of petered out. And then over at Donruss, they used Leaf for their O-Pee-Chee equivalent in Canada. And then they rebranded that for high-end cards. And so they didn't take advantage of using their old brand from the past for retro cards. They didn't get into that. But Topps continued where they started making archive sets every once in a while where they would reprint cards from the past. Other brands, well, not other brands, but other companies that were not mainstream brands had already been doing this. Topps started to do it in the 1990s with their archives cards. And over in basketball, they had something really fun where they made a Topps archive set to look at all of the cards that they would have made if they cared to make basketball cards in the 1980s. So as we were heading into the mid-1990s, there was the pretty interesting fascination that we all had with old cards, but it wasn't quite a market mover for the entire sales force of cards. Old players were still more of a curiosity, and in baseball there was more of a market. I mean, even Upper Deck made a kind of a reprint set for a brand that was obviously not theirs from the past, but it was still kind of riding under the current until 1996. And in 1996, there were three different card releases that all played into what we would see in 1997. The first one was Topps' 40th anniversary of football cards. So this was, for Topps, this was a really big opportunity to do what they'd done in 1991 with baseball and across all brands. So for football, they did a card design that was kind of retro, but they started making archive cards in their card sets as inserts. So they'd already started with the baseball set, but for football, which was really the point of doing these, they made all the cards of Joe Namath across his career for Topps cards, going so far as to even making an actual tall boy of his rookie card. But they also, in Topps Chrome for football, did a whole set where they recreated one card for every design they'd ever made. And it was all modern players, so they were all retro cards. And so they were having fun really exploring the history of football cards, which just was a brand new concept, basically for collectors. Over in Donruss, they started making football cards for the first time, so they looked at Topps archive in basketball and looked at that absentee dad move and said, we want to do that too. So we're going to show football card collectors, if we had cared to make cards for them, what the rookie cards would have looked like. Again, kind of cool, but it's still just an insert set, so it was not something done at a very large scale. But over in basketball, we saw Fleer lean into their tradition of making modern basketball cards by recreating cards from their original 1986 set, both reprints of the original cards and retro cards that were looking at what cards would have looked like if certain players had been present in that set. And this card set was really cool to look at, but it had Fleer now starting to look at their history, really starting to take their history seriously. So by 1997, we had all the pieces that we needed for 2 different retro card sets that we would be able to see. And Fleer, for their baseball set, they decided to bring the Goudey cards from the 1930s. They decided to take that and make an insert set to celebrate Fleer's history in baseball, because Fleer's main history in baseball had been 59 through 1962 or 3, something like that. Doesn't matter because those cards didn't really matter, but that was kind of their history. But they did have Goudey as a grandfather company iteration, kind of like play ball to Bowman. So that was a part of their lineage. And they took advantage of making an insert set, which was modern players on that old card design. They would even do that again when the basketball set came along later on in the year. But for football, they didn't bother to do that. Instead, they took that idea and turned it into an entire set. And they weren't the only one, because Pacific took Philadelphia, which was attached to nobody, and used that to make a retro set. But in the case of Pacific with their Philadelphia cards, they made a truly modern card with a true retro card design, which was a modern design inspired by the past. Gorgeous cards. Fleer, though, they took Goudey and they decided they were going to make an entire standalone set of modern football players, all in a virtually the exact same design that they'd used in the 1930s, with the classic Babe Ruth cards and all of those cards that we just kind of heard about in the past. They were too far removed for most collectors to ever know. Well, now for football card collectors, we were going to have a 150 card set where all the cards were designed like those Goudey cards from the past. And the cards were done on a cardboard cardstock, and they have not a glossy card surface. It's a card that definitely feels like it's older. But the card dimensions are about the same as they'd been in the past. So this is almost square, a little bit smaller or a little bit narrower than a regular card. So it's a little bit awkward to work with, doesn't fit too well into card pages, but not small enough for 12 card pages. So it has to go into the 9 card pages. Just quite misses the opportunity to really sit well in your collection. And I mean, they are close for those 12 card pages. So that was the design of the card in terms of the construction, but the design itself is a thin border around the outside with kind of it's a wood grain is what they're going for. And then a colorized black and white picture of the player inside and a simple band down at the bottom for the player name. And it's all kind of out of focus. The whole card is designed to feel like it's an old card. It's a bold move, interesting move, but it does kind of limit the ability for collectors nowadays to get, and by nowadays I mean in 1997, to really get into the groove of it. They tried a little bit too hard to make it kind of quirky, and it just doesn't quite feel right. And the card set, like I said, 150 cards, checklist at the end, and it's almost all veterans or current day veterans of 1997, but there are 2 legends that they also included, which were Y.A. Tittle and Chuck Bednarik. And these 2 players were like spokesmen for the Goudey brand. So they both had cards in the set, and that was the card set. They didn't have any insert set. They didn't have any subsets because, of course, they wouldn't. That's just not part of the design. But it was the 90s. You couldn't get away with just a straightforward set. So, of course, they had a parallel. And the parallel is the same card, except they did a modern version of it. So here you have the same picture, or excuse me, they have where the picture came from with a full normal background, black band at the bottom, red foil, and fully glossed. So these, even the back looks different on these cards. So these cards are a great opportunity to look at the original cards and then the modern equivalent design-wise, which I like the concept. In terms of the execution, it's a little clunky. It's very much a 1995 playoff prime concept, but still, the way that it comes across is a very unique quality to this card set, and the parallel really does look nice and very much makes up for the original card design. And this also does apply, as you can imagine, for both Chuck Bednarik and for Y.A. Tittle, so they have cards at the end that also have these parallels. But because they signed a contract with Fleer, why not sign on to that to do autographs? And they most certainly did. So both of the legendary players, Y.A. Tittle and Chuck Bednarik, did autograph cards, and the autographed cards are the parallel, but there are two ways you can tell that it's the autographed card. One of them, of course, is by looking at the embossed Fleer logo, that seal of authenticity. In fact, this is probably easier than some of the autographs on the cards. I mean, like the one I've got, I can hardly tell the autograph. It's across the number, but it just disappears into the card. But the other way you can tell the autograph is that the red foil is replaced by a dusty rose color. So it's a light pink, dusty pink, is the color for the foil for the name and for the logo on the card. So that's the set. But it's Fleer, and it's the 90s, so you better believe they've got inserts, and they actually don't have as many as inserts as they could otherwise have. But still they've got a few, and the first one is Chuck Bednarik Says. And the Bednarik Says cards all of the insert cards are glossy, and they all have some foil on them in some way. So with these cards, they use a skybox approach of two colors behind the player, and these are players that defensively minded Chuck Bednarik is calling out for modern day. Pretty simple, pretty basic, straightforward card. Then they have Heads Up, and Heads Up is a playful card, definitely designed for kids, taking full opportunity of what this real estate gives to offer. It's a big headshot with a kind of a cartoon design underneath, and it is a card that fits perfectly into Collector's Choice, even more so than the Collector's Choice cards have. I mean, this is a fun card, and it's just great that they did it in the way they did it, and it really does elevate the whole set. Then they have Pigskin 2000, and here Fleer's got into something that they loved at this time, which is etched metal and brush metal. Here it's only etched metal, so it doesn't have a really cool spectral effect to it, but still, it's a really solid card and really interesting, and it's definitely the standout of all these cards. And it feels kind of odd seeing a card this complex with this dimension, because you're normally going to see a lot more real estate taking advantage of the effect. Regardless, they have this one, and then the last insert set that they have is Tittle Says. So, offensively minded Y.A. Tittle, this is his equivalent to the Bednarik Says, and in this case, it's a lot of text behind the player and very bold, and that's Goudey. Now, fortunately for us, Fleer did feel that it was justifiable making another set, and so the next set that they have is also 1997 Goudey, but we refer to it as Goudey 2, not Series 2, Goudey 2. It's a complete standalone set, 150 cards, numbered 1 through 150, and they used the other classic Goudey design for this one. So this design actually fits in with the inserts that we saw in the other sport, or that were referenced in the other sports. The cards have a tilted band down at the bottom with a picture of Gale Sayers, who is the spokesman for the Goudey 2 set, and it says Sayers Says at the bottom, but that's not a parallel. All the cards have that, because on the back it has a quote from Gale Sayers about each one of the players. So that is the way that this particular set is designed. The cards feel a little bit firmer, a little bit better made. Just, really, the original cards from the first 1997 set are pretty flimsy. They just don't feel right. Here, this feels like they really took the time and really took the effort. And then also the images are really sharp, and the whole detail behind the player feels like a lot of care was put into this. So this feels like the real card set. And it is not a parallel of the first card set. They do stand alone. They do have different numbering for the different players. And they also have a different star for the set. As you can already imagine, it's Gale Sayers. So he has cards in the set as well. And the cards for him are located in 3 different spots. Card number 1, card number 40, which makes sense, and card number 150. So he bookmarks the set and he shows up at his own spot. 3 different cards of the same player. And otherwise, the card set is just a bunch of regular veterans. And yeah, and they do have a parallel, and the parallel is the Gridiron Greats. And Gridiron Greats is the same card design, except they have a gold print coloration for the band down at the bottom, with also a different picture of Gale Sayers on it. And then on the back, they have a little they have the text for Gridiron Greats, and yeah, that's the parallel. Well, that's one of the parallels. They also have Goudey Greats, which is the same design as the Gridiron Greats, except they have gold foil down at the bottom instead of gold print. But on the back, they're all serial numbered out of 150. But interestingly, the lead-in number is 4 digits, so they could have up to 9,999 serial numbers, but they only use 3 digits, 150, for whatever reason. So understand, that 4th digit is there for no reason, but it is supposed to be there for some reason. And that was the set. Only, actually, it wasn't the set, because for every single player, they have all 3 parallels. But with Gale Sayers, well, did they do autographs? Yes, they did. All 3 cards come with autographs, but also all 3 cards come with another parallel, which is their Rare Traditions cards. And Rare Traditions is the same as the regular cards. It's just that they have some gold foil that says Rare Tradition down by the player head, I should say. So that is different just for the Gale Sayers cards, and they're very rare cards. They're tough to come by. So 147 cards in the set have 3 parallels, and then 3 more, all Gale Sayers cards, have 5 parallels. Regular, Gridiron Greats, Goudey Greats, Autograph, and Rare Traditions. That's the set. Now, they do have some insert sets. In fact, they have 4, just like in the previous case, but these are all a lot more complex, a lot more interesting. And a perfect example is Big Time Backs, which kicks it all off. And this has a lot of stuff going on, starting off with the fact that, well, it's obviously die cut. These cards are a lot better manufactured, these parallels, in order to do the different things that they do. And in this case, they have a very well-pressed card, which allows for a not too intricate, but seemingly intricate die-cutting process for the entire card. The card also has foil. It has the silver foil up at the top, and then it has a different kind of foil for the text on the card. But it also has kind of wood grain around the outside of the card, which is, well, that is actually set in. So it has relief on this card. It's a very complex card. The way it's all constructed really is quite impressive. Then they have Glory Days, and Glory Days this is a really cool trick, because this card it's not about it having relief. It's actually embossed. The whole card is embossed, but it's embossed with a surface on the top that is not glossy. It's kind of matte, but it's also kind of foil. It looks like a tin type. It literally looks like tin. All the embossing is designed to be like tin, but the way that the card comes through, it looks like it's made out of tin. I don't know how they pulled it off, but I love that they pulled it off. It really is a wildly successful creation. Then they have Rookie Classics, and this is just about as straightforward as you're going to get with a little bit of die cutting. And it has foil that has a similar quality to what we just saw on the Glory Days. So it's not a rich mirror-like foil. It's kind of a hazy one, but it still has its own quality. And then they closed it out with Vintage Goudey. And Vintage Goudey this is something that takes just about everything all into consideration. It has seriously complex die cutting all the way around the outside, scrunched football, the whole thing. Very cool. It also has embossing on this card, and the embossing really comes through well with all of the intricacy on the card. It also has a glossy surface. I mean, they did just about everything on this card. It really stands out. But that's the thing about Goudey 2. Goudey 2 was where they put all the effort, and they pulled it off. So those were the 2 sets in 1997 for Goudey, both football, Goudey and Goudey 2. I really do like the second set, and I really am glad they made the first set. It is fun, but it's that weird kind of thing of, well, what do you do to bring back the past? There are lots of options. Some will work, some will not. This was an attempt that did not quite work because, in part because we don't have card pages for it, but also in part because there wasn't enough done to really allow for much footing. But then again, Goudey back in the 1930s, there weren't a lot of sets that were done, so it's not a rich tradition. But still, this is one of those things from the 90s where I'm really glad that they did it. They got this out there, got it out of the way, and it allowed for more complexity to our hobby, to the way that we collected and experienced the whole world of cards. And that's all there is to say about it. So, I want to thank you guys very much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Definitely check out my other videos. And yeah,